Welcome to 10th or Tuesday, episode number 26. My name is Michael Boldin, joined by
Michael Maharrey.
Today, Mike, is the 390. I think I might be a day off, but at least how I've counted it, this is day 390.
It's a lot of days.
That the GOP has failed to get rid of Obamacare. The original talk back when Obama was in office, of course, was to repeal, and they passed how many times a clean repeal, and then all of a sudden, in a really sneaky little switch, it was repeal and replace, and then suddenly just getting rid of an individual tax qualified as getting rid of Obamacare. These people are liars. They are never going to do the right thing, and we don't trust them, but we're going to keep tracking how many days that they failed to do what people think that they were going to do in the first place. Today's 390. But I want to talk again about the economy like we did quite a bit last week, Mike. And you've become quite the expert on a lot of this with your work here at 10th Amendment Center and over at shiftgold.com. There's three bills that we're talking about that have had some action on the state level to help undermine the Fed. Last year, of course, Arizona, Ron Paul came out to support the bill that was passed by Representative Mark Fincham in Arizona. I think it was House Bill 2014 last year. And then similar legislation dealing with encouraging people to use gold and silver as money on a state level. Just yesterday in Idaho, I believe, House Bill 449 passed by a vote of 60-9. Now, this is interesting. You got an update on this through our friends at Money Metal Exchange. Is that right?
That is correct. JP Cortez over there sent out a press release that came in my trusty inbox. And I wasn't aware of this bill until I saw his announcement that it had passed. And it's an interesting bill because Idaho already is kind of advanced in terms of the way they treat gold and silver. They've already removed the sales tax and the capital gains tax at the state level. This bill would actually address federal capital gains. And what it's attempting to do is essentially nullify the federal government's treatment of gold and silver as a commodity. So what it would do is it would allow or require residents in Idaho to either add or subtract the capital gains or losses they got from their federal income taxes on their state return. So if you had a capital gain, you would actually have to pay a little bit for that at the state level. If you have a loss, you would actually recoup some of that loss on your state taxes. And the whole point is to treat gold and silver as money and not as a commodity.
Okay.
It's kind of a nullifying bill. It nullifies the federal treatment of gold and silver as
in practice, the practical effect of it, how much money you have in your pocket. So it's really similar, Mike, and they don't have it in our list of bills to talk about, but it's similar to this bill here in California where people can't, under federal banking rules and regulations, the Federal Reserve doesn't let anybody do business at a bank if they're in the marijuana industry. But also the IRS prevents people from writing off normal business expenses because they say, well, this is a criminal enterprise, no matter what they're doing. It's a criminal enterprise, so they can't write off cost of goods, none of this stuff, day-to-day operations. So California has a proposal, some legislator here has a proposal to allow people to counteract the effects of the federal taxes in the state tax. Now, I don't think it comes out even totally, but it probably does help significantly. So you can, if you can calculate what it's going to cost, that's what you need to do for business, and this is helpful.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to me, not to go too far down a bunny trail here, but, despite the way the federal government has treated these marijuana businesses, it's hard for them to get banking. It's hard for them in terms of their taxation. They're treated like basically illegitimate businesses as far as the federal government goes. And yet the industry has grown and expanded despite what the federal government has tried to do. And it just shows the power of the market when people want to involve themselves in an exchange. What the federal government does has much less effect than they would like to think.
So House Bill 449, I didn't see it updated on the Idaho website, so hopefully we got the right info from JP.
If not, we'll blame JP.
Well, I do know it did say that it passed second reading, so it's possible that vote of 60-9 really is the second reading. But then again, you can't, on the state level, we had someone write in today about our weekly update. We sent out a newsletter last night talking about our weekly update, saying, hey, Gun Owners of America, who I love, Larry Pratt is awesome over there. On their emails, they always had a little action alert button on everything. So it's really easy to just do one click and support stuff. Most of their action is on the federal level, and there are a lot of companies that provide that service for relatively cost-effective amounts. But on the state level, a lot of the updates are so behind schedule. Mike, I know you've been doing some reporting on bills in Hawaii, just as a side note. And, they pass a bill out of committee with a committee substitute, and we can't report on it because we've got to wait for 3, 4, 5 days before they even. And the sponsor of the bill oftentimes, and I know this happened down in Mississippi, there was a stingray bill, a bill to stop stingray spying that was passed out of committee, and the sponsor, didn't they tell you, look, hey, I don't really know what was passed out of that committee?
Yeah, you didn't have a copy of the committee sub, and so yeah, it's really difficult, and I think people have no idea the amount of work that goes into tracking all of these bills and all of these various state legislatures. We don't have a website that we can go to that tracks all of this stuff. We basically, I shouldn't say we, it's basically you, creating spreadsheets and just tracking these by hand. So,
and great Chrome add-ons that I can open hundreds of tabs at the same time sometimes. But well, even if there was and there are some services out there that do allow us, I mean, it's really expensive. One that I saw was like $5,000 per state, but it still ends up being the same problem. If the state isn't updating the info, it doesn't get through the API, and then we can't get the proper update. So Idaho, even if that only passed second reading, I've never seen a bill go through second reading at that large of a number and not pass third. We're counting H449 as passed the State House in Idaho as well. But there are two other bills that do basically the same thing, but from a different angle. The same thing meaning what we want to do, which is undermine the Federal Reserve's monopoly on money and encourage people to use something else, and in this case, gold and silver, what it's supposed to be, as money. In Alabama, we talked about last week two bills that have been moving to remove, Mike, this is to remove sales tax on the exchange of gold and silver.
Correct, yeah.
One of them, Senate Bill 156, after last week's 10th or Tuesday, did pass out of the Senate. Was it unanimous? Yes. I'm double-checking. Yes. Senate Bill 156, late last week, passed unanimously out of the Senate. Give us an overview. I mentioned dealing with taxes, but this is a big roadblock. Having sales taxes on the exchange of one form of money to the other discourages the use of the one form of money that's being taxed, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's economics 101. You tax something, you get less of it. And by taxing gold and silver, it puts a little millstone around that market's neck. And, as we talked about with the Idaho bill, it's the whole fundamental notion of treating gold and silver as a commodity like oil or, wheat, instead of treating it like what it really is, which is money. And we've talked about this analogy, and we use this in every report. I know we've talked about this on previous 10th or Tuesdays. If I went to the bank and asked for change for $1, and they gave me 4 quarters and then charged me a nickel, that would be absurd. You don't charge tax on the exchange of two types of money. And essentially that's what a sales tax on gold and silver does. So this Alabama bill would remove that barrier. It would create a more open market, and it would make it easier for people to use gold and silver in everyday transactions, which is ultimately the goal that we're working for. Interestingly, I got an email the other day from a guy in Alabama. He's involved in the retail gold and silver trade, and he was actually one of the guys that helped draft the language for this bill. And he sent us an email, thanked us for reporting on it.
Awesome.
And I shot an email back, asked him if he thought it was going to pass the House, and he feels pretty confident that this thing's going to go ahead and pass and get signed into law.
Yeah, I saw that there's already, so it passed the Senate, and usually once if a bill's not going to pass the other chamber, generally it's a committee chairman in the second chamber that holds it up. Well, SB 156 already has a committee hearing on the House side, I think tomorrow. It might be later today. I put it in our notes as Wednesday. So that bodes well for passage in Alabama. I saw a really good report in the New American by Alex Newman on this, and he did a little bit more kind of traditional reporting on this, Mike. I don't know if you saw this or not, but basically he contacted sponsors of the bill, maybe even the sponsor and some organizations behind it, talking to them about, like, well, hey, what are you doing about about this? What's this bill? And, they told him, oh, yeah, well, we want to remove these taxes. And then he also mentioned to them in we saw some reporting over a 10th Amendment Center. I mean, he may not have mentioned us in his conversation, but he said, hey, there's some reporting that this will help undermine the Federal Reserve. And the response was, in essence, oh, that wasn't our goal, but cool. And then
Right.
in his report, he discussed the way that we talk about it as well. And it's really interesting to see how sometimes people don't. And this comes from Rothbard in Conceived in Liberty. He wrote about how in the pre-revolutionary times, about how movements build oftentimes because even with people who don't have the same goal in mind, but somehow they end up being connected. And this is what we see in the entire nullification movement all across the board. People that don't necessarily look to have the same things accomplished help each other in many different ways. And I think this gold bill in Alabama is a good example of that.
I thought it was interesting last year when Ron Paul went to Arizona and testified in support of the bill that removed capital gains taxes there. He mentioned in a meeting that he had afterwards in another speech he gave that this is more than just about sound money. When you really get down to it, this is about smaller government. The Federal Reserve really enables the federal government to spend all of the billions and billions of dollars it does. I
Trillions?
wrote trillions.
How
Yeah.
much do they? I can't tell the difference between what they spend and what the debt is.
It's so the debt right now they're saying is in the neighborhood of 21 trillion.
Yeah.
And I know that the spending bill that was just passed by the GOP, speaking of not doing things, so the Republicans were the party of fiscal responsibility when
A lot of
Obama
Tea
was
Party people in there. I saw Ted Cruz voted for
yeah,
some crap too. Well, now this is money that's coming to my area. These people
right.
are
Well,
garbage.
basically, Rand Paul was about the only person that was
Yes.
really making a stink. But regardless, that added about another $300 billion of spending on top of the debt and spending that we already had. So it's really hard to even calculate the amount of debt. So this is all financed by Federal Reserve and money printing. And I wrote an article this morning for Shift Gold talking about the fact that one of the reasons the stock market's tanking right now, or at least extremely volatile, is that everybody's worried about the bond market. The Japanese and the Chinese are no longer buying treasuries like they were. The Federal Reserve is
Oh,
not
they're not
buying
propping it
treasuries.
up, right?
Yeah. The Federal Reserve is not buying treasuries because they're trying to reduce their balance sheet. We have quantitative tightening now. Who's going to buy all of these bonds and treasuries in order to finance all of this debt? I mean, nobody really knows. So we're going to see interest rates start to go up. And I think ultimately what will happen is the Fed's going to give in. It's going to try to save the stock market, and it'll start lowering interest rates back down and try to
Pump some cheap credit in there. And that's why it's so important to support these bills now
yes.
that advance sound money. We see sound money, gold, silver being used as money in places like Utah because of what's the name of the gold bank in Utah?
I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, they opened that up as soon as they were able to under the
Legal tender law from 2011, and then also the Texas Gold Depository coming online this year in Texas, and then these bills to treat gold and silver as money, as they should be, instead of as a commodity that you tax with sales tax. This will encourage people to do so. And there's one other bill on this line that I want to talk about, Mike. It's House Bill 103 in Wyoming, which was just introduced. Tell us a little bit about that one.
So the Wyoming bill does three important things. It essentially does almost everything at the state level to set the foundation for what we're seeing in Utah or with the Texas Gold Depository. So the three things that it does is, number one, it makes gold and silver legal tender, and it makes it as something that can be used to pay taxes and debts in the state. So it officially makes it legal tender, not just a commodity. And in so doing, it also removes capital gains taxes and sales taxes from the exchange of gold and silver for Federal Reserve notes. So it completely sets the foundation to use gold and silver as money in the state of Wyoming.
Yeah, that's really awesome. That's House Bill 103. I'm not sure what the session schedule is there, but we'll be reporting on that as well. So, three important bills that we're covering this week. There's more soon. Idaho House Bill 449, Senate Bill 156 in Alabama, and House Bill 103. If you're in any of those states, not from out of state. If you are in any of those states, call your state senator and state representative and encourage them to support those particular bills. A few calls actually does help make a difference on that, so take some action. I also wanted to mention briefly, Mike, I put in the notes here, I have been watching the cryptocurrency space for a number of years. 10th Amendment Center has accepted donations and orders in cryptocurrency since early 2013. Although, I mean, it's not a large amount of our people actually use it. But I think even though under the Constitution we're focusing primarily on gold and silver at the state level, our strategy goes beyond just what states do, Mike, right? We talk about individuals, communities, businesses, et cetera. And I think, and I had a Twitter conversation with one of my Twitter followers, Lee337, just today had reached out to me and said, hey, what do you think about crypto? I see it, and this is how he put it, I see it as one of the best ways to end the Fed. Mm-hmm. And I agree, whether it's Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin, Litecoin, Omise Go, any of these, Ethereum, if people are using money that is not sanctioned by the central banks, then the central banks can't control it. And I think however people choose to make exchanges among themselves outside of the fiat system is a positive. Do you ever cover any of this for Schiff Go? I know Peter Schiff looks at it as a big bubble. I don't know if he sees any use of it as money, but what's your thoughts on it, Mike?
Well, I agree with you. Peter's
Well, that's all we need to talk about then.
Right. No, we don't even have to have a debate.
We're good. Show's over.
Peter would definitely debate us because he does see it as a big bubble and something to stay away from.
Yeah, but even if it's a bubble for in the investment stake, let's say, okay, so Bitcoin, BTC, the larger known one. There's Bitcoin Cash. There's mostly, I think, it seems to be supported more by libertarians than the BTC. But BTC is the big one. It trades now in the $8,500 to $9,000 per coin range. Let's say that's a bubble, and it's really only, the market really only sees it as worth as $1,000. Well, so that's a bubble for investment if you're trying to make a bunch of money out of it. But can it still be used as a currency outside of the Federal Reserve banking system? And I think that, for our perspective, is more important than on what we're advising people to invest and make money in. I think what we want to do is encourage people just to spend money or spend something in trade for goods and services that isn't fiat dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
although we'll take however many fiat dollars someone wants to give us over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that, I think right now there's even some debate within the crypto space as to whether, it's an investment, or is it a wealth preservation, or is it a currency? And I'm with you. I see its primary value in the long term as a currency, as a way to easily exchange, goods and services across vast spaces without any kind of government interference. And who knows whether it's going to be Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash or some other cryptocurrency that evolves in the future. I think that this is a technology that is going to be extremely important, extremely valuable for those of us who are interested in liberty and living free. And, I'm all for it.
Yeah, and for those of you who really encourage, and I think what's important about that, a lot of people talk about, I want to buy it, hold it, and earn a bunch of money. The get rich, buy a Lambo mentality, that's one thing. But I think people who want to replace fiat dollars with something else, we focus primarily on the constitutional solution, which is gold and silver as tender. The business over in Utah that actually has set up a system where people can do electronic transactions and have a debit card that transfers into gold and silver. Same is going to happen in Texas. That's our primary, but also for people who want to do this with crypto, this is very important, and so we of course accept it. So for those of you who want to grow the crypto economy and have some of it exchange hands, feel free to send it our way. We accept Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, Zcash, Ethereum, and Omise Go. I don't have that one
So
listed yet.
could our viewers buy our last hope with crypto?
Well, the plugin that we were using on our WordPress site really was deprecated, and it stopped working about a year or so ago through Coinbase. So for a while, we were doing that. But something happened, and I haven't been able to do updates on it to make it work. I know there's another company that we used originally back in around 2013 called BitPay, which is currently, I think they only have BTC, the original Bitcoin, but they're adding support for Bitcoin Cash and a number of other cryptos. And as that is updated and we do some overhaul of the website, we are going to add that. So yes, people will be able to do that. And when you do that, we originally were just transferring it directly into fiat, but because we want to get out of fiat in the long run, if you do that once we update, we will hold and use the crypto, and then maybe with suppliers, find suppliers that want to use crypto as well. So once we do that, we will just focus on the crypto space for those of you who give us crypto. We're not going to just sit on it.
Do you like the way I plugged my book there? That was good.
Our Last Hope. It is an amazing book. Get it over at shop.10thamendmentcenter.com. Moving on, Mike, let's talk about, since we mentioned how the GOP has been a complete failure on Obamacare, they should be able to easily pull this off, but of course they can't. Same people in office, mostly from when Obama was in. They all voted to get rid of it back then. Now, of course, they've got other considerations. They don't care. It's political posturing, just like the crappy Democrats. They're all garbage. So that's why we are very supportive of the direct primary care system. I've called it, Mike, on this show, the Netflix of healthcare. So basically, you pay a monthly fee and you get general services provided, totally covered under that monthly fee for your healthcare. But in some states, that's still treated as insurance. It makes it very expensive. And the Direct Primary Care Law, or Direct Primary Care Act, which is passed, it looks like it says in 15 states, is what I put in the notes here, would exempt this from insurance regulations. So that just moved forward in Wisconsin. Is that right?
It did, and this Wisconsin bill is kind of interesting because they're actually toying with the idea of utilizing direct primary care within their, I can't remember what they call it, but it's basically their Medicaid system, their the state healthcare system that runs the Medicaid distribution in the state. So they're actually looking at using this direct primary care model because they've already recognized the cost savings that is possible within this system when you get out of the insurance system completely. So part of this bill is a requirement that they create a study group to look at incorporating this into their state healthcare or health insurance system and to introduce legislation in 2019 to make that happen. So this actually goes farther than any of the other direct primary care bills that we've seen passed in that they're actually looking at making it part of their state system.
So these passed out of committee, AB 798 and SB 670. I tend to be a little skeptical when I hear that. My gut, because I don't really understand the whole process, but I start thinking like, oh, okay, now government handout money starts going into the direct primary care system. I think that will end up undermining it. I'm sure within the general public, that adds legitimacy. And I think this is something, just to go back to the crypto discussion, a lot of people in BTC, Bitcoin, are really excited every time a state adds support or talks about regulation or recognizing, like in Arizona, the state Senate just passed a bill that will accept Bitcoin for payment of taxes. But I think in the long run, the more that government gets involved, the worse off. We'll see. But positive that in Wisconsin that they have moved forward out of committee with two bills on the Assembly and the Senate side to recognize direct primary care agreements as just agreements, a business agreement, not as insurance.
Right.
Oh, that's something unusual for you, Mike. That was dead air. So 15 states, 15 states.
You know what that was? That was a Robert Murphy, Tom Woods, Contra Krugman pause.
That's the official term.
Pause.
So 15 states have passed legislation like this. We cover them up till the end of 2017 in our annual report. I noted that page 48 to 50, if you go to 10thamendmentcenter.com/report, you can get a little bit more detail on that. And one of the last things I want to talk about today, Mike, is a follow-up on our work. We're doing a lot of work on the surveillance issue, especially with the NSA surveillance expanding and being put in for another 6 years. I mean, this is essentially permanent at this point.
Absolutely.
We've been covering the Michigan bill to turn off resources and material support to warrantless federal spying programs, House Bill 4430. But last week, as I mentioned, there was going to be a hearing, and that happened. Shane Trejo and Dennis Marburger testified in favor of the bill. What's going on, Mike?
Yeah, so they had the hearing. It was a very positive hearing, and Shane and Dennis both did a fantastic job. And I kind of want to give a shout out to Dennis because he does a lot of work behind the scenes up in Michigan, and is probably not nearly as well known for what he does as what he actually does. He's a tireless worker, and appreciate him taking time off of work to go to Lansing and testify on that behalf. And Shane did a fantastic job too. And really, there's only been a little bit of opposition to this bill in
Yeah, it passed
Michigan.
the House 107-1, so it's already had a hearing on the Senate side, right? Senate Judiciary.
That's correct. And so we expect a vote in the Judiciary Committee within the next couple of weeks. I've been working with the sponsor on some amendment language to address some legitimate concern from some of the executive departments in the state. And I'm really optimistic that this bill is going to pass out of committee and go to the Senate floor for a vote. And the committee has been the holdup on these surveillance bills in Michigan. So if we can get it out of there, I really think we've got a good shot at getting this bill to the governor.
Yeah, there was a really good bill, a joint resolution, House HJR 0 or something, that Jim Runestad had gotten passed out of the House around the same vote, basically to a proposal for the voters to change the Constitution to add electronic data and communications under searches and seizures for privacy. And basically, same type of thing happened, but it's not been even given a hearing over a year later on the Senate side. So this is very positive that the Senate Judiciary Committee in Michigan is willing to hear this bill. And you've been doing great work on that with the sponsor, Mike, to answer some objections and to get some testimony correct. And thanks to Shane and Dennis there for showing up in person to hopefully get this bill forward. Now, the interesting thing is people say, okay, Michigan, there's no NSA facility in Michigan. Well, we'd like to keep it that way. And passage of this bill will ensure that it is almost certain that it will stay that way. There will not be a giant, massive NSA facility. And the thing is, we know the NSA is running out of space. Even though they've expanded to San Antonio, Texas, and Bluffdale, Utah, they're actually expanding their home office in Fort Meade. For all we know, generally what happens is they add new facilities behind the scenes. They make deals without, and you don't know about it until after it's done. So a bill like this is extremely important. As we know, the NSA is rapidly expanding their capabilities and their appetite for more facilities and more data collection. So we want to kind of cut it off at the pass. And it's going to be a long process one way or the other to turn this around. But this is very positive in Michigan. And then, of course, what happens when good things happen in one state is a legislator in another state says, I like this idea as well. And Rick Bratton in Missouri has filed a very similar bill in his state. Tell us a little bit about that. Basically the same thing, or give us an overview of what the bill would do. It's House Bill 2402 in Missouri.
Well, it's interesting because when I read the bill, it's virtually identical. I mean, a lot of it's word for word from the Michigan bill. So obviously, Bratton saw the Michigan bill and looked at it and said, hey, this is a great idea. We want to do this here in Missouri as well.
Right.
And it essentially prohibits any resources or personnel from being used for the collection of warrantless data by agencies like the NSA and the FBI. So it's an anti-commandeering bill, as we like to call them. Just requires no cooperation. And I think it's pretty cool that it's almost exactly the same bill because it shows the importance of somebody stepping forward and taking the bull by the horn, so to speak. And when that happens, we start to see this in other states. And I guarantee you, if it passes in Michigan, if it passes in Missouri, you're going to see a lot of other states taking a look at this too, because there's this gut reaction. And it's interesting because as I've talked to different people in Michigan, it goes across the political aisle. You get Republicans and Democrats, and they both look at it and say, well, of course we shouldn't be helping with unconstitutional warrantless surveillance. And so I think this is a movement that can really grow quickly if we can get one of these bills passed.
And certainly in a state like Michigan or in Missouri, it's going to be a little bit easier than in a place like Utah, where the
Right.
some kind of a was it a lieutenant general that came to visit somebody in Utah? We had been working for
Yeah, it
those.
was it was the head of the National Guard, so that I can't remember his exact title, but he was the general in
Colonel or a
charge of the
general
National
came
Guard.
to
I
visit
think
the
he was a general.
Rules Committee chairman
Yep.
in Utah and said, "Don't you let this to committee," because the process is a bill gets filed in Utah, it goes to Rules Committee for review to make sure it's okay, and then it
Right.
goes to a committee. Then the committee has a debate on it. It gets voted. It goes to the floor of the chamber, and the Rules Committee chairman is very powerful then, because then he or she can say, "Oh, well, this isn't even getting assigned to a committee," and that's actually something that's happened in Missouri in recent years. Any good bill, basically. So last year, the Second Amendment Preservation Act, a bill that would ban any assistance for any type of federal gun control measure, it never even got assigned to committee until the last day of the legislative session.
Yeah.
That sneaky bastard that was, I
Yeah.
forget the guy's name, he just picked the bills that dealt with the federal government and didn't assign it to committee, so there's no way that could pass. So this type of thing can be really bad news behind the scenes. And then they can just say, "Oh, I don't, no one really follows that." So it's a really easy way to buck the system. But so House Bill 2402 in Missouri, I haven't seen it. Let me take a look here while we're talking, see if it's actually been assigned to committee yet. No, it was filed last week, so we'll know there's something weird going on if it isn't assigned to a committee in the next 1 to 2 weeks. It's kind of a long session there in Missouri. But this is really important stuff because, Mike, as we know, the federal government is never going to stop its own spying programs, right? I mean, anybody who thinks it's just nuts, it's not going to happen. So therefore, it's essential.
I think we talked about it last week, but it just boggles my mind that we have all of this brouhaha about the FISA memo and the FISA system's being abused. Well, they knew about this and they renewed FISA.
Yeah.
They didn't even mention that until after FISA was renewed, and it just shows the duplicity and the disingenuousness of both the Republicans and the Democrats, because this is bipartisanship. It's like I said last week, you get bipartisanship when the U.S. wants to bomb somebody or spy on us. You're always going to get nice across
or spend our money,
Yeah.
or take it, or they're all sudden all really good buddies at that point. So we'll be monitoring that as well. Hopefully a vote on House Bill 4430 in Michigan and a committee assignment for 2402 in Missouri. There's a number of other bills that we've covered over the last few days. License plate reader. I'm just going to run right through these really quickly. We're waiting for a bill that would restrict the use of ALPR's license plate tracking devices. Is on the governor's desk in Nebraska. It's due to be signed either today or tomorrow, or it goes into effect without his signature. A similar bill, probably a little bit stronger, Mike, in Massachusetts. Is that correct? A little bit better. S2299. Is that a good one, or
It's decent. I'd put them in
decent?
basically the
Okay,
same.
so ABC. This is middle of the
120
road.
days that they can store data. And then they
Okay,
have to
we like to see it at what level?
I'd like to see it at about 48 hours, but
Or
if
nothing, right? So our
nothing.
friends over at Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, they organized an event where they all went to a city council hearing in Culver City, which is a really old suburb here in Los Angeles. The city is supposedly a sanctuary city where they're not going to help the federal government on immigration, but yet they're spending or proposing to spend about $500,000 on these license plate readers to cover a few square miles, and then pass the information off to immigration authorities and the DEA and everybody else, FBI, all kinds of people, I'm sure, that is getting this data. So Stop LAPD Spying Coalition is working locally to stop local communities from installing these license plate readers, but they're happening all over the place. And Hamid, the head of that organization, is basically taking a really hardcore stand, much harder than we do, even though I think sometimes the goals are very different. He's anti-capitalism, for example, and
Right.
we're very pro-capitalism. But he believes that you can't give them an inch. As soon as you give them an inch, if you allow them 48 hours, they'll probably keep it for 48 years behind the scenes, and then we'll only learn about it after the fact. And he's probably right. although I think strategically we'll take some small steps and try to bring things forward. So Massachusetts and Nebraska are kind of like in the middle of the road as far as quality.
Yeah, I mean, they do the important things. They do have restrictions on data sharing, and they do require reporting, and they do require data to be destroyed within certain specified amounts of time. So, if nothing else, they do prevent the creation of permanent databases.
Okay.
Permanent databases that's where you really start running into the huge problems, because those permanent databases are going to get transferred up to the feds and to God knows who else. So, we look at it as a first step, and perhaps down the road we can push harder and get some of those timelines tightened up in the future.
And it isn't impossible to take that approach. We've seen on things like drone surveillance how over the last few years we've seen a bill introduced and it's decent, and then the same state in 1 to 2 years after will make it better. Same thing on asset forfeiture, where a number of states have restricted asset forfeiture on a state level, but they've ignored the fact that you can do an end run around state restrictions and then hand it off to the feds. And then a year or two later, they start addressing the federal level. So you can actually make progress, and most famously, I think, at least as far as our reporting, is on hemp. So a state like West Virginia, is that right, Mike? They had only allowed hemp farming for research purposes as allowed by the federal government, and then they realized that no one was doing it, so they said, okay, to heck with it, we're going to just allow it for everybody anyways.
Yeah, and I think the key to this is that us, the activists, the people that are on the ground, we can't just get one step and then
be
just
like, oh, this is
walk
amazing.
away.
Yeah.
We have to constantly press, and we have to always look at these things as building blocks, and foundation. And an ALPR bill that requires, that limits their use and requires data to be destroyed after a certain amount of time, that's certainly a foundational step. We want to continue, and we will continue, pushing these legislators to take additional steps once they set these foundations and continue to build on. That's really the long-term strategy that we've adopted. And it can be effective, but it can only be effective when activists don't get complacent. We don't think, well, we've won the battle. Even if we get the best bill in the world, we always have to watch what they're doing, because, like you said, they're going to do stuff behind the scenes that we don't even know about if we're not paying attention. So
two quick things before we close out. One, wow, did I just blank? Yeah. No, two things. One is this strategy that we're talking about is Thomas Jefferson's strategy. As you noted in some blogging and reporting, that Thomas Jefferson, after the Kentucky resolutions of 1798 were passed, he sent them along with a letter to James Madison, and he said, hey, this is the paraphrase, we should always espouse the ultimate principle of what we want to accomplish, but on the ground strategically, we should, quote, push as far as events will render prudent. That's his quote, Thomas Jefferson. So we take the same approach. We recognize that. Oh, and the second thing is on the ALPR or something else, for example, restricting their use is better than unrestricted use. Destroying the data after 120 days is better than never destroying the data. So we recognize that we don't want them to be sharing this information at all, and possibly we don't trust them to even have the tools. But if we pushed only for the ultimate, it's very likely it would never pass. So we push as far as the events of the day in each location render prudent, like Thomas Jefferson advised for strategy, and then we keep working to build on that. And if you don't keep working to build on it, then you're not doing a good job. Now, sometimes we don't always have the resources to do that, but that's our goal on all of these things.
I remember in the early days of the drone bills, 3 or 4 years ago, when we first started seeing bills come out to limit drone surveillance, and there was a lot of opposition from libertarians saying, oh, we can't support this bill because how's this and it's that, and we're gonna oppose this bill. And
Mike, we've gotten this on every single issue. Generally, there is a subset of people who don't recognize the strategic advantage of improving the situation and say that if you don't support an immediate abolition of something, you're actually supporting the opposite side, and that's not the case. So we take I think if it's between some dude on Reddit or Facebook claiming we're the bad guys versus the fact that we are following specifically Thomas Jefferson Jefferson's strategic advice to push as far as events render prudent, and then we hold to our ultimate principles in the long run, I'm pretty comfortable saying that following Jefferson's advice is probably a good move.
I'm good with that. And you always have to look at the status quo. And that's what I always would tell those people on the drones. What we have now, the status quo is absolutely unlimited use of drones for whatever police want. So, even a small step in limiting that is better than unlimited use for whatever they want. So.
And one thing that I like to consider before we head out is that the fact that I would say almost all state level politicians really are awful. They really are. Even though we get lots of good bills introduced, most of them are terrible when it comes to the Constitution and liberty. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're doing. Most of them are bad. And in that situation, we're still seeing bills get passed, and that is huge. Over the opposition of a bunch of bad guys, we're still seeing positive things happening. We're going to keep doing this, and the more that we do it, the more popular it becomes, and the more that these slimy politicians want to do something popular, and if it's the popular thing is the right thing, then we're going to be very happy with that. Of course, if you support what we do here, make sure to go to 10thamendmentcenter.com/support, and you can become a member for as little as $2 a month. When a lot of people pitch in a couple of bucks, we can pay for the bills, keep the lights on, and then, of course, do some online advertising to reach new people with the message of the Constitution and liberty. Thank you for tuning in to 10th or Tuesday. We will see you very soon.